pupils of selected schools, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. We say receive the warm and generous hospitality of Asanteman. This historic program is live around the world on Radio Openswo Radio, the official mouthpiece of Asanteman, and on Asase Radio 99.7, on TV, Oirepa TV, and numerous other affiliate platforms, both online and on traditional media. In welcoming us officially to this august event, it's my pleasure to invite the Chairman of the Council of State and the Chair of the Silver Jubilee Planning Committee, Nana Ocho Sribo Jabi.
Otumfuo Osetutu Santayana, Honorable Minister of State, Honorable Immediate Past Chief Justice, Regional Minister, Ananum Vice Chancellor of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, my alma mater, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my duty is to welcome you, and since in our traditional setting, saying welcome means Akwaba, I thought that my duty would be done if I just uttered the word Akwaba and then resume my seat. But when the Otumfuo is around, we cannot be very brief. We have to go to town and say a few more things. So I'll say a few more things, and if there are a few, just pardon me that there are a few. I speak on behalf of the Otumfuo Osetutu the Second Jubilee Planning Committee. This committee has been put together to celebrate the 20 meritorious, momentous years of Otumfuo's accession to the Golden Stool. By a very happy coincidence, this year, the Silver Jubilee year, also coincides with two seminal events in the annals of Ashanti history. These are the 150 years of the Sagrenti War, the Sagrenti War as we call it in G, the corruption of the word Sagrenti, and also the 100 years of the repatriation of King Nana Prempeh I from Seychelles after 28 years of exile. Now, this function is the first of a series of activities to mark the celebrations, to commemorate the activities as I've enumerated. Taking them in chronological order, the 6th of February was exactly 150 years ago when British forces under Sagrenti loosely invaded Kumasi, looted the palace of precious regalia, and completely burnt Kumasi down, and left the town smoldered after, who are notable in Ashanti history and customs, to regale us with the causes of the war, the cause of the war, and Ashanti after the war. It is instructive to add that since Otumfuo's installment some 25 years ago, the issue of the return of the regalia that was looted by the British has engaged his highest attention, and he has never relented in pursuing this mission and has been knocking the doors of the British establishment with a view to getting them to return their regalia. By a happy coincidence, the British finally have answered our prayers, albeit in some veiled way that half a loaf, they say, better than none. However, some of the regalia which were taken to the US are here and going to be here until time and circumstances shall be no more. So, as I said, the jewel in the crown of the celebration will be first and foremost the return of the regalia from the US or from America, which will be handed over to Otumfuo the day after tomorrow on Thursday at the Kutupudin Deba. And then the return of the regalia at the British Museum and at the British Victoria and Albert Museum on the Akweside Deba, which is slated for the 12th of May. We hope that even if it's a loan, it will be a permanent loan to us. As I said earlier, we have two functions this morning. One is a symposium, and the other is the launching of a book on the history of Asante. As you all know, before the written word was introduced into our educational system or into our culture, the mode of transmitting our history, our values, our culture, and our morals and other things was through the spoken word. In the evening, the old men would assemble the young ones and then tell them about the wars of old, our customs, our traditions, their games, and other things. So it was compulsory for children to attend to these calls. Hence, we call the word Titika Asum. It has been corrupted to Titika, but it means Titika Asum. That is the past resides in the years. However, with the introduction of the written word and calligraphy, the year became less receptive to Tite, and therefore new modes had to be introduced to maintain and retain our history and to transmit it from one generation to the other. We were fortunate to have Otum Foster at Maprempe, the second Asante Hene, the first formally educated Asante Hene to ascend the stool in 1931, and through the dint of his hard work, was able to restore the Confederacy, which had been disbanded in 1896, in 1935. Immediately upon ascending the stool, he felt that our modes needed to change. So, perhaps our children were going to school, and for that matter, they were not getting the tuition that they deserved and they had to have. He assembled other eminent people, the Sagrenti, the Ike, CEO says, the Aki Adimans, and others, to give our history the benefit of being put down in writing, so as to remove the inconsistencies and the contradictions that attend to transmitting history orally. This was indeed a formidable task which lasted several years, and it is a happy coincidence that he had Professor Tom Maskaski, an eminent son of Asante, who though has he's been with Ashanti for over 50 years, since he came to Ashanti in 1968. Virtually a year passes without his coming down to us and writing about Asante and all issues and everything. And Professor Bakaski has accepted to edit this book. And this is a veritable history of Asante from our own perspective, without any biases, without any contradictions, and without any enlargements or any diminutions. And the second aspect of the program would be to auction the book. And I'm sure that you have come down with your big pockets and with your fat checkbooks so as to give the auction the necessary support that it deserves. I'm sure that those of you who will buy at the highest price will have autographed copies by Otunfo himself. So, as I said earlier, I welcome you. I think I've said a few things, and if my few is not enough, I think I'll take leave and then give the floor to our eminent MC to continue the program. Thank you all very much for coming, and we hope you will enjoy the opportunity. Thank you very much.
His wise and warm words of welcome have set the tone for a long day of reflections, learnings, and insights. Please help me appreciate once again Robin Hine, the Chair of the Council of State and the Chair of the Silver Jubilee Planning Committee, Nana Otuo II. It has fallen to a very distinguished son of Asanteman to chair this morning's auspicious event. To introduce him, make welcome the Kwamuhine Achamfu Asafu Bwache Ajima Bunsu.
Thank you very much, MC. Your Royal Majesty, Otunfo II, Santinus. And now to Sebo II, and Chairman of the Otunfo Silver Jubilee Committee, Honorable Minister for Education, Dr. Seya Wadutu, Honorable Minister for Energy, Matthew Buku Prempe, Nanan Mama Nanan distinguished speakers, VC, the press, ladies and gentlemen, I will observe all protocol. It is normal for such an auspicious occasion to have someone who can ably steer the affairs for the day. It therefore gives me a great pleasure to introduce the chairman of the occasion. Our chairman for this August function is a native of Kumasi. He entered the University of Ghana in 1976 to read law and was called to the bar as a barrister in 1981. He worked at the Attorney General's office for his national service. He was a private legal practitioner and was the president of the Eastern Region Bar Association. He was appointed as a High Court judge in 2002, and because of his hard work, he was promoted to the Court of Appeal just a year after that. In 2008, he was appointed as a Supreme Court judge. He held several positions in the judicial service and other judicial bodies. He was the chairman of the Legal Aid Commission, the chairman of the Council for Law Reporting, the chairman of the Disciplinary Committee of the General Legal Council, and in 2002, he was appointed as the Chief Justice of Ghana. He retired in May 2023, after 21 years of distinguished career on the bench. Aside being an accomplished legal professional, our chairman is also a football enthusiast. No wonder he was elected as the chairman of the FIFA Disciplinary Committee and also became the first African to be elected to occupy one of the FIFA judicial bodies. He is married with 4 children. Please join me with a big applause to welcome our chairman for the occasion in the person of the former Chief Justice, Anim Yeboah. Ladies and gentlemen, your chairman, your audience. Thank you very much.
And now, my Lord Justice, the Chair, your audience.
Your Royal Majesty, the Otufo Asantehene, the Honorable Regional Minister, the Honorable Members, Honorable Ministers of State, the Vice Chancellor, Nananom Maihine Abrimpong, the linguist, the Vice Chancellor and the Pro-Vice Chancellor, the members of the academia herein present, eminent members who are all here as university community. I am indeed honored to be the chairman of this all-important occasion. This is an occasion which marks the 150th anniversary of the Sagrenti War. Some of us just decided to learn history in passing. Unfortunately, we didn't know the inner details of the war, what caused it, and the cause of the war, and as the chairman of the occasion said, the end result for this, our great kingdom. We are here today to take stock of what happened about 150 years ago. If we look at the brochure, we have assembled eminent speakers who have amassed enough knowledge to share with us. History, they say, must be accurate, free from all distortions. It may be told that in narrating history, there are bitter ones which should not be ignored. There are sweeter ones which we should all swallow. At times, we have to swallow a bitter pill just to cure ourselves. So, my Lord, Nanano, distinguished elders of the Asante Mine, I am here to humbly accept the invitation to be the chairman of this great occasion, and I'm grateful to Otunfo Asantehene and the chairman of the planning committee for giving me this honor, this great and memorable occasion. So I am here to serve you, and I think you all cooperate and have a fruitful discussion as the history starts to unfold for our consumption. I am grateful, and I think it will be good. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
His Lordship Justice Wesi Yeboah is our chairperson for this august occasion. Please, a round of applause. We thank you for accepting to chair, and we know that your great years of experience, your grace and aplomb will come to bear on today's experience. We now move to the symposium. To introduce our keynote speaker, it's my pleasure to invite Otunfo Asantehene, who is the chair of the Otunfo Foundation. Make welcome Nana Professor Ohiniba Kwachi Eji Waini II.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. Your Royal Majesty, 2432 second, Sajene. And I will choose Board the second, Chairman of the Jubilee Planning Committee, Mr. Chairman, Chief Justice, and One. Honorable Minister of Education, Osei Edushun. Minister of Energy, Honorable Matthew Boku Prempe, Doctor. Regional Minister of Ashanti, Vice Chancellor KUST, and unknown distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Allow me a few minutes to introduce our keynote speaker for this landmark symposium on the Sagrenti War. We have with us today no other person than the illustrious and prolific historian, Professor Thomas C. McCaskey, also known as Kwaku McCaskey. I was trying to get close to Kwaku here. Well, Professor McCaskey is a professor of Asante History, Center of West African Studies, Birmingham University, United Kingdom, and Professor of History of Africa, School of Oriental and African Studies, London University. He retired 2011. He first worked in and on Asante in 1968 at a tender age of 22 and was the youngest faculty member in the History Department of the University of Ghana. He spent the whole of his life working, researching, writing, and publishing on Asante. He has written 2 monographs on Asante, State and Society in Pre-Colonial Asante, and Asante Identities, History and Modernity in an African Village. He has also published over 80 papers on Asante, 50 of which have been republished in his Asante Kingdom of Gold, Essays in the History of African Culture. The history of Asante Kings and the whole country itself. Knowing the importance of research done by the committee that was convened by Otumfuo Osei Ajiman Prempeh II, which started way back in 1939, he singularly edited the final volumes of the typescripts and manuscripts, which culminated in the final publication of this timeless piece we have with us today, History of Asante by Otumfuo Osei Ajiman Prempeh II. His curriculum vitae is replete with anecdotes, and I had a few minutes with him. I asked him what was your best moments in Kumasi. He said when he served as the royal golf caddy for Otumfuo Prempeh II. I believe that's where he got a lot of his notes too. Today, his keynote address is on the Sagrenti War and its aftermath and reflections. Please join me to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Kwaku McCaskey.
Nana Atumpo, Nana Noom, distinguished guests, and the public, I'm very honored indeed to make this short presentation about the Sagrenti War. I want to start very quickly with a review of the reign of Kweke Addo, who died in 1867. The reason I'm doing this is simple. Kweke Addo was the most pernickety and stickler sort of man when it came to the law. He's known as Kweke Annisary, Kweke the Wise, he's known as Addo Farmbull. He was somebody who really enforced the laws of Asante. In the process, he gathered together a great deal of money in gold dust, principally, but also in specie and other things. And I say all this because I want to underline and emphasize something that I think is being overlooked. When Nana Kwikadu died in 1867, he left behind a very great deal of money. And I will give you some idea of this. The money was stored in three places. It was stored in the Adaka Cafe, the great chest of the treasury. It was stored in the Asante country palace at Abarasto, and it was stored elsewhere at Breman. The sums involved, I've been able to calculate because we know the dimensions for the Adaka Cafe, and with assistance from members of the British Mint, chemists, engineers, the kind of people who could know about the science of gold and the measurement of gold and all the rest of it. We have calculated that the amount of gold contained in the Adakesi alone at Quegadure's death was in excess of 400,000 ounces. Now, the 100,000 ounces in 1867 were worth 1.2 million pounds sterling. But you know what's happened to gold in our lifetime? The contemporary, the current value of the Adaka Castle is somewhere over 2 billion pounds. A lot of money. Now he left this money to his successor, Kofi Kakari. And Kofi Kakari was a waster. He distributed money to buy popularity, and he was eventually distilled at the end of the Sagrenti War. I'll come to the war in a moment, but let me simply say that, to underline what I've already said, that the attempt to get back the treasures looted from Kumasi by Sir Gordon Wolseley in 1874 takes no account, because it cannot, of the gold in gold dust and unworked gold that the British must have carried away with them. We don't know about this. Of course we don't know, because it was loot, private loot, and so it is separate from the cultural artifacts that Nana Tufo is trying to retrieve for the Asante man and retrieve for the Republic of Ghana. Now the war itself is often referred to generally as a colonial war, one of Britain's first colonial wars. But we can refine that a little. We can refine it, in fact, quite a lot. In the 1860s and 1870s, Britain came to realize that it did not have a first-class army. In fact, it was an army composed of people, rather like in the 18th century, who had bought their commissions. And this had to change, and change it did, and the leader of this change was Sir Gordon Wolseley. Assisted by the War Secretary, Edward Cardwell, he modernized the army, and of course, this didn't mean just modernizing how it was run. It was modernized from the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. And I will name only a couple of things here. The British came to Asante in 1874 to make war, 1873 to make war, with telegraph communications, with people on board the ships who brought the officers to advise them on what Asante was like. In other words, intelligence gathering on a new and unusual scale. They also had with them, and perhaps most crucially, Snyder rifles. These were the result of revolutionary developments in armaments, and unlike the flintlocks used by the Asante or the muskets used by the Asante, these were very accurate, long-range repeating rifles, the first, or at least one of the first, among modern rifles. So they came, and they came with all this in their baggage and their intentions. Now, Wolseley himself was determined to rise to be head of the British Army, which he eventually did. And he brought with him to Asante a group of officers known as the Wolseley Ring, the Ring of Friends, who would rise with him. So there was a very personal motive in Wolseley fighting this war and being seen to have fought it and won it for himself, for Britain, for Queen Victoria and the rest. And we have proof of this. This was the first war in which the general in command, Wolseley, was accompanied by large numbers of the British press. This war was reported very extensively in England, with jubilation, of course, when Kumasi was taken. Now, the Asante themselves, Kwekadua Aji, the 30 years of his reign, had maintained a hands-off policy towards any of the states south of the Fra and the Europeans. There were no real or significant Asante military ventures south of the Fra in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Kwekadua Ajiman's view of things was that Asante ruled inland itself and its northern dependencies, and the British ruled the whites on the coast. So it was a world vision that really contrasted the two worlds of Africa and Europe. He was the ruler of Africa, and they were the rulers of the south, led by the whites. But of course, this was nothing to do with what Wolseley wanted or what the British government practically wanted. And so, despite the fact that in 1873, the Asante withdrew those military forces he had on the borders of the Fra and southwards into August County, he withdrew them and tried to make peace with the British. Wolseley absolutely refused. There is no other word for it. He turned him down flat because Wolseley and the British government were determined to have their war. Now you can imagine the kind of propaganda that was put about by the British about Asante. A savage despotism, blood running in the streets, endless sacrifices, barbarians, racism in short, and very highly developed Victorian racism. So Wolseley crossed the Fra and went to Kumasi. Now, one of the things that was never noticed about the occupation is that he was only there for a couple of days. He was frightened that the Asante would counterattack. He was frightened that the army he led would come down to tropical diseases. And so, having secured his victory, he scurried back to the coast very, very quickly, stopping only at Fomena, where he sent to enforce a treaty he had drawn up with the Asante Kakari. The treaty was a treaty of, and you may have allowed to laugh at this point, the treaty was a treaty of permanent peace between Britain and Asante. And he asked that Kofi Kakari, as a sign of goodwill, hand over 50,000 ounces of gold to show his good faith. He never did that, but that's another story. Now, in the occupation of Kumasi, the place was, as previous speakers said to you, the city was burned and comprehensively looted. The Avan, the big story building constructed by Asante Yosigonzo Kwame in 1819 to 22, the King's Own Palace, they were all ransacked by the British. Now, I've told you the amount of gold that was floating about in Asante at this time in dust. We have no account of it. Soldiers just filled their pockets or took it away in little wrappings, things like that. So we just do not know about that, but we do know about the cultural treasures. And I just want to mention two of them in passing, and they're simply this. In the Wellcome collection, the foundation in London, there is the largest gold mask known from sub-Saharan Africa. It is a portrait of the Bandahini Woroza defeated and killed by the Santiaguinos in Quadro in the 1760s, and it weighs over 2 kilos. Its current value in gold alone, never mind its aesthetic value, its cultural value, its value of gold alone is over 80,000 pounds sterling. The other piece of loot that I want to particularly emphasize was not taken in 1874. It was taken in 1896 when the British returned and arrested Asante Inianju Premi. Now, you would think this was nothing. Somebody must have just picked it up and taken it away. It was a brass basin called Ayakasi, which was displayed before the royal mausoleum in Bantama and was part of the practices of recalling the ancestral monarchs of Asante. It is simply a brass basin, but the British took it away. When Prempeh came back in 1929, he wrote to the British and tried to get this battered brass basin restored. And the British wouldn't give him it. And it is still in Britain at the United Services, the Army Museum in London. The war itself had a catastrophic effect on Asante. Catastrophic in the sense that, well, in a number of senses. Above all, it shattered unity. Asante works best when it's united under its king. The British seduced away and led away large numbers of defectors into the Gold Coast colony, and Asante descended into a period of anarchy. Now, you all know this anarchy was at its lowest point, was the civil war that occurred in Asante between 1883 and 1888. There is no doubt at all that the British encouraged resistance to Kumasi, whether by giving arms, which was illegal of course, and which they never talked about publicly, money, or just general support, and above all, refuge to those who opposed the Asante in the Gold Coast colony, which they had established in 1874 after the Sagrenti War. I haven't got much time left, so I will simply cover what is left of the story. In 1892, the British wrote to Asante Inianju first, offering him British protection. That is, that Asante, which he was trying to restore to its former status after the Civil War, that Asante should come under formal British protection. Annisary Prempeh simply refused. He said, no, we're an independent kingdom. Not only did he refuse, he sent an embassy to London to underline his point that Asante was an independent kingdom. The embassy spent some time in London, but the British government refused to see it. And while it refused to see it, it was planning a second invasion of Asante. And this occurred as the embassy returned to the coast and the British advanced on Kumasi again in 1896. There, Annisary Prempeh was faced by one of the greatest challenges that any Asante has faced. Should he fight? Should he not? The solution he came up with is beyond admirable. He knew that after the Sagrenti War and after the Civil Wars, he knew perfectly well that if the British unleashed their military power now on what was a weakened Asante, people would suffer in enormous numbers. So instead of permitting this to happen, he decided to surrender himself and his mother and various other of his dignitaries of his family to the British, provided they prosecuted no military action in Asante. So he was taken away as a British captive, and the rest of the story you know. He remained on the coast until 1900, and then he was sent to Sierra Leone, and finally to the Seychelles and Indian Ocean, from which he did not return until 1924. But the Asante themselves had had enough of this. In 1896, when they took Prempeh away, they established a system of direct military informal rule through collaboration with chiefs, people that they had appointed themselves to run the country for them. This only lasted for 4 years because the Asante themselves, ordinary people led by chiefs as well, fostered, created, and fought in military uprisings against the British in 1900. This is commonly known as the Yasabuwako because of the heroic behavior of the Chwesiiba, the woman Yasatu. That war ended in the ruthless suppression of the Asante. This time, there was no offer of perfection peace. There was no offer of friendship. There was simply the fact that Asante was made a British Crown colony in 1901, was given a British governor to rule over it in the absence of an Asante, and in the aftermath of the war, large numbers of people convicted of treason against the British Crown by fighting for Asante in that war were jailed, hanged, or otherwise deported. Now, there's very little else I need to say, except that this is a shameful episode in British history, like most of British colonialism. It is a shameful episode because it was based on industrial might and a racial ideology. The British were never a great continental military power. They did not have large land armies. What they did have and what they pursued was an overseas empire for which they could extract money through trade, preferential rates, and all the rest of it. And Asante was one of the earliest additions across the world to that particular empire. It's often forgotten, and this is my final remark here, it's often forgotten how short British colonialism was. When I came to Asante, age 22, out of Wahan in 1968, I met people who had lived all the way through the British period. They were born before the British came, and they were there when the British left in 1957. So it is time finally to put this episode in the past and to reassert Asante unity under the Asante and go forward into the future. And I encourage most strongly Asante man to pursue further the matter of the restoration of the treasures that were taken in 1874 and taken in 1896. Thank you very much.
What unites a people? Is it flags? Is it army? Is it gold? Is it money? Stories, my friends. Stories. And what a story we've heard of betrayal, of courage to fight for values and principles, defeat and utter humiliation, and yet an indomitable will to bounce back and defend nationhood as Santiman and write our own true and unadulterated history. What you've just witnessed, Prof. Tom, is the Dutch Shumu dance, a very ancient and popular dance among us, the Asante, which is going extinct. We reenact it today in your distinguished honor to thank you for your amazing work, which has been a labor of love for us, the Asante people, of whom you now belong to as a father and a brother. To you, we say, Yadawasia and Sada, Eja Neonia Makaski. Please, a round of applause. We proceed now in this celebration by acknowledging the causes of the war, the cause of the war, Asante after the war, but most importantly, the significance of what this anniversary means to our nation moving on. We're delighted to have eminent men and women who are herein gathered to lend us their thoughts on the way forward. Make welcome our moderator, who will be seated right in the middle, a son of Asante who is the Ellen Gane Professor of History and of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, a proud fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a corresponding fellow of the Royal Historical Society, UK, Professor Emmanuel Achambu. Seated with him, make welcome an adjunct lecturer and gender historian affiliated to the Department of History and Political Studies at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology here in Kumasi, Professor Eugenia Anderson. In their distinguished company, from the Department of History and Political Studies at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, is Ghana's first trained social historian of medicine. Make welcome Professor Samuel Edudemfi. With joy, we receive the former research coordinator of the History and Politics section of the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana, Professor Samuel Intewusu. And last but certainly not the least, our brother, our father, Professor of Asante History at the Center of West African Studies, Birmingham University, UK, Professor Tom McCaskey. Prof, the moderator, you have an hour to dedicate.
His Royal Highness, Nana Otumfosi Tutu Abedu, Nana Drabin, Chair of our Silver Jubilee Planning Committee, Honorable Ministers and Parliamentarians, the Vice Chancellor, my academic colleagues, since I'm in the university, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to stand on all previous protocols which acknowledged our present dignitaries. As Jerry mentioned, my name is Emmanuel Kwekwe-Jampu. I'm a professor at Harvard. I will briefly give you the context and the format for the symposium, and then I'll sit down. So we are looking at the last quarter of a century, so from about 1874 through the Yasantua War of 1900, 1901. Some of my colleagues may share reflections that might go a little forward than that. We have 4 speakers. So our first speaker would be Tom McCaskey to provide a big picture. So we are looking at how the Amantne and the Amantuo fared in this last quarter of the 19th century. So a big view. And then Samuel Edudemfi will come after that and provide a perspective from Kumasi, a cosmopolitan city, a royal city, and the perspective on this last quarter of a century. Then we'll go to Professor Samuel Intewusu, who will look at the missionary factor, both in Sagrenti, going through the annexation in 1896, 1900. After all, it was the taking of the Ramsiers and Kune, Bodat, keeping them in Kumasi for 4 years, that incited the sentiments that would lead or feed into Sagrenti War. It is also important to note that as the 1896 expedition came, they were followed by missionaries. So it is not surprising that some of the earliest photographs we have of the submission of Prempeh and his mother are from the archives of the Basel missionaries, because they followed the invasion of 1896. Then we'll go to Eugenia Anderson, and I've been enjoying conversations with her these last few days. I've had the pleasure of being associated with 2 histories by 2 Asante. The first one by Prempeh I, when he was in the Seychelles, and then the present one that we will launch by Prempeh II. In conversations with Eugenia, she challenged me to reflect on what a history of Asante could look like if dictated by an Asante woman, and what that female perspective of Asante could look like. And I think I will sit with that for some time to come. Each speaker will have 12 minutes for opening remarks, maximum 15 minutes. Because they are professors, they are welcome to come to the podium to share their opening reflections. I encourage them to look in my direction, so when I do this, you know you have 3 more minutes, and when I do this, you know you have to stop talking. And since Otunfo is here, stop talking, you stop talking. After they finish, we will open up for Q&A, and I'll ask the audience to ask a question. Let it be a question or a very brief comment. We are creating something called Asantepedia, which will be a popular platform online for individuals and families to deposit stories they have from their families between about 1874 and Prempeh the first return in 1924. So if you have good stories, that's where it should be, so that as many people as possible can ask short questions. So that's the format, and I will now invite Tom McCaskey to start as well. So let us welcome Professor Tom McCaskey.
Will be getting tired of looking at me, I think. But I've been told to talk a little about what happened to Asante after the Sagrenti War. After the Sagrenti War, Kofi Kakari was destooled because he had presided over the humiliation of that. The trouble was that the successor of the golden stool was his brother Mensa. Now, Mensa was a man of avaricious, greedy, and vicious temperament, and is remembered as such today. He had a low, whispering voice, and if he could not hear you, or you could not hear him, he would find you or punish you. He was that sort of person. And in the conditions that followed the Sagrenti War, he was a tyrant, and he is remembered as such. He died on the cross in 1900, and his sons had him disinterred and reburied in Kubasi in 1911. And there was a huge outcry against this happening, but the British allowed it to take place. Well, going back to his reign, he thoroughly alienated almost everybody in society. And he began this by invading Juaben in 1875 to, in his view, bring it to heel. The Juaben had fled once before, but they fled this time south again to Cocorregua in New Juaben, and they would not return. And this opened the floodgates. Without that unity of the Asante, he was respected and he would impose his will and interpret custom properly. Without that, all kinds of conflict broke out in Asante. Adansi against his wife, Mampong against his wife, etc., etc., etc. And these are covered enormously in Frankie II's book, which you'll be very happy to hear I'm not going to read to you. And he, excuse me, and so these conflicts spread throughout Sanders War. When I was in Washington, it was mentioned that I had written a book on a Kumasi village between 1850 and 1950. That village is now in Kumasi, Adibeba, which belonged to the Manweri school. And in that book, I was able to cite testimony of people who lived through the Civil War. of 1883 to 1888 that were collected in the 1940s. And it was a period of intense deprivation. People starved to death. People were homeless. People were refugees. And meanwhile, the warlord, the Aranhini, who had asserted themselves against Mansa descended into a civil war between themselves. The country was in ruins. Kumasi, in the end of the 1880s, was in a terrible condition. An Englishman on his way to Jaman in the Ivory Coast visited it in 1889 and said it was virtually in ruins. It was nothing like it the way it was portrayed in the early 19th century by earlier English visitors. And so, Benjamin Franklin came to the school in 1888 amidst these ruins. And he set about repairing the Asante, bringing it back together as best he could. And he had some notable successes. An expedition to Incoranza in 1892 brought the Incoranza back into the fold of the Asante Islands defenders. But of course, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, Admiral Bradley could do nothing against the British. And so, while he was desperately trying to get the Asante Islands reunited under his authority, the British came, as I mentioned in my first address, the British came to take it away in 1896. Now, in Prempeh II's history, there is an account of the debate that he had with his chiefs about what he was going to do. And he said to them, if we fight, we will all be killed in a second of the rule. So I will sacrifice myself as the Asante and go as a prisoner with the British so that they will not fight here and they will not make the Civil War even worse. So Prempeh was taken away with his mother and his father, Lady Jambini, off to jail in Elmina. And the Asante were not happy for it. They were very unhappy for it indeed, which is why, as I said, that war broke out in 1900, 1901, the Ya Asante War. Now, it is very difficult to compress and to tell you with any detail, in fact I thought nobody could, the events of that period between 1883, between 1875 and 1900 when Britain was taken away. They are immensely complicated. But certain things need to be known, even if only briefly. Firstly, Prempeh had some notable successes. As I said, in the Carranza and with a number of areas around Kumasi. But he could not stem the tide of disaffection that had been caused by the sheer anarchy of the war and the brutality inflicted during it. Not only that, but now the British deliberately seduced dissident Asante who were against Prempeh, to come south into the Gold Coast colony, as indeed the Juagan had done in 1875, and there they were given both protection and allowed to plot against the Asante and to be Prempeh. Now, these are a very significant group of people, and the reason is simple. They were the people that the British relied on as collaborators once they had occupied Kumasi again in 1900 and turned it into a crown colony in 1901. And these people were placed on the stools, the senior stools, the Abraham stools and the Alan East stools, of those who had been deported, ultimately to the Seychelles with Prempeh. Now, there's a long and complex history here, nobody will believe. Again, I'm not going to go into it, but let me simply say this. The first 20 years of British rule are really about getting rid of these collaborators. The Asante people themselves would not put up with these people. People like Kwame Boakye and Agoda or Kwabitua, the Chancellor Stool, or the British informant, Wijiapia Nwama Kwabitua's brother, who was made anti-Aberdeen by the British. They would not put up with this, and eventually, one way or another, all of these chiefs were removed. But after Presley came back in 1924, the British would not in any way countenance that he become ruler again. That had to wait until 1931, when he was reinstated not as a Santini, but as ruler of the Kumasi division, and nothing else. And it took 4 more years of petitioning, of trying to persuade the British to have the Confederacy restored. Now, I'm going to finish by talking about the Confederacy. The Confederacy that the British restored was restored under the precepts of British custom and British law. The principle was decentralization. They would not, for their own political reasons, accord the authority that Kumasi has enjoyed in the pre-colonial period, and they encouraged, if not secession, then forms of independent action by all these armies. And Franklin II spent most of his long reign between 1931 and 1970, when he was not very tall, so I was carrying his clothes. He spent most of his long reign trying to restore the oldest of them, the Asantehene's authority, the Asantehene's arbitration of custom, and these forms of traditional government back in Asante. And that struggle, I'm going to name no names, but that struggle, as you all know, everybody in this room knows, goes on to this day. I will merely mention in conclusion, Kumasi. When I first came here in 1968, Kumasi had 100,000 people. Now it's got 4.25 million people. Where is the land? Well, we know that right now, as I speak, land is the biggest issue in Kumasi. And the Asantehene has to defend the Golden Stones' rights in the land in Kumasi, which were taken away by the British and restored only in part in the 1940s. So, there are still battles to fight here, and I hope they're battles that will be won. Thank you very much.
His Royal Majesty, Tufu Asante Osei Nano, the Vice Chancellor of Care University, full Vice Chancellor, Ministers, and all here present, may I stand on the 15th protocol to proceed. I shall try to sketch my thoughts around the 18th and 19th century Asante politics. My interest fundamentally will be to focus on Kumasi. One of our sisters, Edwards, who is a PhD candidate from the diaspora, has done something very significant, and I shall use her point on the setting of Kumasi and the palace prior to 1874. The 19th century cosmopolitan city of the Asantehene in Kumasi was a well-built metropolis and economic center, covering 1 mile north to the south and 3/4 of a mile in width. The monumental Ahimfi, which is the palace of the Asantehene, was located on a hill in the city center, measuring 1,500,000 square feet and covering 34 acres. The east edge of the imperial residence was the sacred Supreme River. The Supreme River deities and Asantehene's place where you worship Tridiampo, even to the immediate west, strategically positioned throughout the lush garden landscape of the Asantehene city, were elaborately Asante designed buildings and residences belonging to royal chiefs and courtiers to the king. The Asantehene city in the Idumili was not demarcated by walls like the typical imperial cities. The architecture of the noblemen's houses surrounding the residence, the dense forest, and the Subi River formed an invisible defense against invaders. European surveyors and religious and diplomatic visitors were in awe of the of the vast forest landscape and the symbolic, aesthetic, and technical beauty of the structures as they entered the city. However, the position of the Asantehene city and surrounding natural and architectural elements was more than what was visible. The imperial metropolis of the Asantehene was layered with spiritual, cultural, and security values to the nation. Indeed, Kumasi represented the traditional political capital of the forest state of Asante, as well as the residents of the Asantehene. Your local royals, all important Kumasi office holders and functionaries stayed there and performed services associated with the Kumasi court, and their conjugal families resided in Kumasi. Again, it is significant to note that Kumasi was also the cultural capital. In this capacity, the atmosphere of Kumasi was characterized by elegance or sophistication, as initially noted. In fact, in 1874, the British, led by Sir Sagrenti, defeated Asante and ransacked Kumasi. The election of Premier I as Asantehene, which began 10 years after the Sagrenti War, was marked by civil war and eventual deportation and exile with key Asante leaders in 1896, first to Sierra Leone and finally to the island of May in Seychelles. British attempts to break Asante and impose their hegemony on Asante did not end with Prempeh's exile. From 1900 to 1901, in the last Asante War of Independence against the British, Asante was defeated and placed under control of the governor of the Gokuts. The British then instituted measures and institutions that started the colonization of Kumasi, which they retained as the capital of Asante. May I, as a point of emphasis, say that when you look at the broader community of society of Kumasi, even though we have the Asantehene with his might and his abilities, the society was equally egalitarian, so that you had members of the community from office holders to those who held no office or position. To that extent, we understand that Asante also had different people crisscrossing. In fact, Kumasi historically was opened up to Hausa, Mande traders and different people from different regions and territories prior to the 18th century and to the 19th century. Kumasi remained an entrepot, so to speak, where different ideas radiated. As a matter of fact, the formation, the founding of Kumasi out of Kwaman, where the Asante constitution was fully firmed up, gives us a very clear impression about the fact that the Asantehene and Kwame Frimpong Anoche, Okonfo Anoche, and the eminent chiefs who resided in their specific social and political jurisdiction agreed to that constitution which brought about the Asante Union. An idea that was alien to the European, because the European assumed that the Asante Union came about only through war, and assumed that the Asante Union could be compared to that, for example, of the European kings or monarchs who might have had their territories or spheres through dint of war. As a matter of fact, this constitution, I dare say, and challenge the discussion, ran parallel to the Magna Carta. In that respect, its authority was so binding in the sacred steam, the Sidiga. That spirituality is that which was also missing in the minds of the European in many respects. Asante from Kumasi was interested in diplomacy. And so before even war, there will be diplomatic engagements, there will be discussions, there will be emissaries, and this subsisted since the time of Osetutu the first Asante. So the critical question, therefore, is to ask, why didn't the British annex Asante after 1874? Just to jump into other discussions. What had changed on the side of the British by 1800? I know that the chair is looking at me, I have more time. The 19th century began with, the reign, Osetutu Kwame Isibe. And we understand that there were a lot of interesting dynamics in terms of diplomacy. In fact, his peaceful relations between the British is well documented. In fact, Kumasi in this period received 3 European missions, which included individuals like William Hyde Cooper in 1816. Then we have Frederick James, Thomas Edward Bowditch, William Hutchinson, and Henry Tegley in 1817, and Joseph Dupuy, Francis Collins, Benjamin Salmon, and David Mills Grace in 1820. So Kumasi was the heart of diplomacy in the territory referred to as Asante and the broader enclaves that it covered. So that is just one example which suffices, right? That these diplomatic missions have one goal: to negotiate for peace, to ensure that there was sometimes an uneasy truce between themselves and their neighbors, including the British. So 19th century diplomacy in Kumasi took a rather different form, nature, and approach over a period of time. It was associated with a changing political scene, especially with the growing influence of Europeans at the coast. So diplomacy, which is effectively known in a modern sense, which requires that you have a representation in a territory negotiating for peace, among other social, economic, and political dynamics, subsisted within Asante. In fact, from about the 1760s onwards, Kumasi had brought, conquered and received rent from Christiansborg Castle from the Dutch. But beyond this period, we see that the space between the 1800s, there was negotiations, and also there were ideas of war and diplomacy which subsisted. And some of these, reports have been, perfectly written and documented by the good professor of erudition, McCaskey. Now, the peaceful relations between Asante and the British in the first 2 decades of the century took a different turn. What happened? Why did it take a different turn? Why would Kumasi go to war? We know about Asante interest in Dutch holding at Elmina. We also understand that the interest of the British was to ensure that Asante's control or influence, or better still hegemony, at the coastal regions will be dealt with once and for all. The question is interesting. Why 1874? Why post 1874? And why did the British not annex Asante in 1874? Now, if you look at the account of war and Kennedy and the others who have written extensively on that, including Professor McCaskey himself, who I referred to, it's critical to note that it was an expeditious mission. The team with Wesley arrived in the territory referred to as a colony by January, the end of January. Came as far as to Asante by 31st of January. By the 6th of January, mission accomplished. They returned through Fomena, where I come from, signed. The treaty was not signed. It was a treaty he would even leave because he would not sign. The story that I found therein has already been shared by Professor Mataski. Now, you understand that it was an expeditious mission, they returned hurriedly, and it did not suggest to us that they were there to stay. Secondly, the terms of the agreement itself, or the truce itself, or the treaty itself, also suggest a very interesting thing, because it did not tell us that the British wanted to have an emissary or a resident commissioner in Kumasi, and for that matter, Asante. Now, this notwithstanding, I mean, you see disputations, especially when a Uruguayan writes in a later period and argues that the British were interested in supporting Asante. That is why he argues that they will support Adansi breakaway, they will support the Gabon country, and all the other countries that were emerging within the state. In fact, if you shift towards Kimball's argument, there is a suggestion that the British had a certain vacillatory approach. They will not get into Kumasi and make any intervention, but they will not also come to fight Asante, even if Asante was plundering itself. In many respects, it is this civil war which persisted in Asante, plus the challenging leadership of Kakari, among other things, that will lead to the depletion of Asante's resources. Two, you would also find that with the depletion of the resources of Asante, the Asante constitution, which they held together, the social contract, which by Asante constitution allowed the state to use a subtle coercion to get members of the state to go to war, had waived. Leadership challenge with Kakari, the one who followed after him, and also an internecine war, a civil war, which had eaten into the treasury of Asante. In many respects, some have argued that is what will cause Prempeh the first to capitulate. In many respects, I agree in tutu with my professor with great erudition that through the tact of diplomacy, Prempeh the first would have to save his people from war, because post 1874 and another war just after 1896 would have been too damning and too dangerous for the health and the power of Asante, especially holding it from Kumasi. I will try to just wrap up. I have 1 minute. So, what is my last take on this with 1 minute? You would appreciate that by 1900, the British had come to town again. They were successful at that, because the rally call for people to come to fight did not have that kind of sense. And that is written by Macassar. Asante will regroup, but we see that even when Asante had been defeated, by 1905, Resident Commissioner Fuller had taken over to behave as if he was an Asante Hene. And even when the real Asante Hene had returned, he made him Kumasi Hene, a creation by the British. The intrigues by the outsiders is what Asante has sought to cure and has found a balancing act to sustain the union till now. I rest my case. Thank you.
His Royal Majesty Otunfo Osei the Second, Nananom Keynote Speaker Professor Thomas McCaskey, Honorable Ministers, Clergy, Professor Emmanuel Achampong, esteemed and distinguished scholar of Asante history, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great reverence and gratitude that we gather here today to commemorate the indomitable spirit and unwavering dedication of the people of Asante, who played a pivotal role during the British and Ashanti War of 1874, popularly referred to as the Sagrenti War. As we delve into the annals of history, we also uncover stories of courage, of compassion, and sacrifice that resonate with the Asante nation. My role in this symposium is to discuss the missionary factor in the Sagrenti War. Many scholars, such as Duwahin, Tom McCaskey, Emmanuel Champon, Samuel Kobe, Archbishop Sapon, Rightly, Abel Wicks, and many more have handled this very subject with some level of excellence. I stand on their works to discuss the interests of the Basel missionaries in the war. In the words of Njoku, the colonial enterprise and the Christian missionary enterprise together constitute two of the most important historical events that have, for good or bad, considerably shaped the history of Africa, including Ghana. Both defining events occurred almost simultaneously. The colonial enterprise focused on the economic and political dimensions of life in Africa, redrawing the boundaries, reshaping its political arrangements and structure, and considerably looking at different orientations and vital institutions. The missionary enterprise impacted heavily on the religious and cultural landscape of Africa and considerably tinkered with its dominant worldview and value system. A critical revisiting of these two major events, either separately or as twin events, is crucial and indeed unavoidable for our understanding of the British Ashanti War of 1874, popularly referred to as the Sagrenti War. Ashanti and Britain fought several wars. Those battles were called several names, such as the Battle of Nsawamkor in 1824, Akatamansu in 1826, Sagrenti in 1874, and the Yar Asantwa War of 1900 and 1901. Prior to the Sagrenti War, Asante had established itself as a powerful political entity with a strong religious and cultural infrastructure. In spite of its greatness, it still fought more wars. The frequency with which Ashanti battled with her neighbors, including Denchira, Fanti, Bono, Elhe, Gan, Gonya, Dagomba, and many more, will have drawn attention to itself by several observers, especially the British and some missionaries. British administrators seem to have arrived at the conclusion that Asante indeed was a threat to their colonial project. Historians have indicated that some of the wars that were fought between Britain and Asante were in relation to the breach of peace and agreement, and that of 1874 was not an exception. It was born out of the desire to ensure that Asante obeys the peace agreement that it had signed in 1863 not to fight the southern states and also to end enslavement of people. Achampong, Wilkes, Tudor, Lewin, and several others have indicated that the Asante British War of 1874 had a kind of crushing military defeat on Asante. Asante got demoralized, and of course, the foundation of its very state was shaken. Indeed, the awesome military technology of the British that was deployed was referred to more or less as the total war. Total war because it characterized the sound that was actually coming from the weapons and rifles that were handled by the British. But the question is that if the Sagrenti War was a matter between Britain and British forces and Asante, what triggered the interest of Basel missionaries in the war? A people that were supposed to spread the gospel. To answer this question, we recast our minds to events in early 1868 and again in 1869 when the kingdom of Anglo and Akwamu around the lower Volta
declared war on the area of Crepi. In the ensuing war, Asante soldiers sacked Crepi towns, including Sokode, Enu, Ho, and took along with them missionaries, including Ramsey and his people, Johannes, Cole, Smith, Richard, and Pam, Ramsey's maid. We might begin to wonder why an internal war could lead to the capture of missionaries. One needs to understand actions and events of this nature from the complex relationships that have developed between society, church, and the state. The Christian church in the Gold Coast at that time was lumped with other European agencies such as governments and trading firms. The church could hardly be considered by the people in the Gold Coast as an agency with a separate existence. Such was the obvious conclusion to be drawn from missionaries accompanying soldiers on their campaigns and soldiers accompanying missionaries on their mission journeys. They are perfect examples, for example, of Rees, who was accompanied by a soldier up to a from the Danish fort. There's also evidence of Freeman going to Kumasi accompanied by military officers. As already noted, the first 5 weeks of captivity of Ranzia and his group saw the captives marching at the daily pace of about 30 miles as they journeyed from Tepi towards Kumasi. This was difficult for European captives who had to walk in the scorching heat from the blazing sun and burning houses. In the process, Ramsey's baby had a fever and Kun a deep wound on his heel from heavy chains. Ramsey's son or child died before the captives got to Kumasi in 1870. Their hope of gaining freedom once they got into Kumasi, as they expected, was yet to be realized. The detention dragged on for more than 4 years. In captivity, Ramsey's wife gave birth to a second child. Attempts were made to release the hostages. David Asante of the Basel Mission, in his letter to the captives, highlighted aspects of ransoming operations that had taken place. And I quote, "Twice have we sent messengers to the Ashanti camp offering money for your release, but in vain. I have been sent to the Bro on the frontier of Achim to try and come into communication with you as up to the present. We have only heard of reports from you. I give the bearer a pencil, paper, and scissors that you may write or send some of your hair as an assurance that you are still alive in Kumasi." With lack of success on the part of the Basel Christian Mission, the British colonial administration from Gold Coast, who now had responsibility for Crepi, took charge to secure the release of the captives. One of the first decisions taken was Britain to take possession of Asante captives on the Gold Coast, including Bofo. I have some water. Bofo's nephew, whom British officers retrieved from Provo in 1869. The plot, it seemed, was to swap captives for the Europeans in Kumasi. Hence, in June 1870, the British governor of Cape Coast, John Popo Henson, released and sent to Kumasi a batch of Asante prisoners seized in a previous Asante war around Achim, with a promise to free more of Asante captives upon the release of missionaries. That was also not successful. At another time, he sent Asantehene a gold embroidered silk worth about 100 pounds. That also did not help matters. Instead, the demand was for 100 ounces of gold or about 1,440 pounds for each captive that was being held in Kumasi. To fast forward to 1872, Kakari sent the captives to Komina, south of Asante on the River Prague. And the message to the British administrator was that 1,000 should be paid to Asante agents in Cape Coast per captive so as to save off the deal. A week later, the captives freed from now, but before leaving Kumasi, the missionaries had redeemed their two African helpers, that is Palmer and his wife Popo, by paying 6 drawn on the Pastor Mission account. As the European captains journeyed to the coast, a British force headed in the opposite direction of the Asante army. The two armies clashed in 1874. The British forces seized the captives and led them as freedmen to Kumasi and to Pecos. It is important to highlight at this stage that the missionary factor played a very significant role in the 1874 war. The capture of the missionaries and the ensuing negotiations allowed the British to plan both in terms of personnel and logistics to be able to launch an attack. Also, the frequent correspondences and spy work and the movement of missionaries such as David Asante enabled enough intelligence report to be gathered on Asante and his forces. Apart from this direct contribution to the war, there were equally important insights that are worthy of note as far as the involvement of missionaries is concerned. The support of missionaries for the war was simply to provide them with a clear form and a direct or indirect way for stability and order in the missionary enterprise in Asante. Since the frequent wars between Asante and the people of the coast proved to be unduly disruptive and even explosive for missionary work. It became evident that after the war, some missionaries, such as Ranzia, had some guaranteed territory for them to be able to carry out their conversion works. The interest of missionaries in the war was also due to the intimate relationship between the former end of the transatlantic slave trade and the beginning of the Christian missionary enterprise in the Gold Coast. Even though slavery had been abolished by the British, in several of their evangelisms, they had come across evidence of existence of slavery in most parts of the Gold Coast, including Asante. Missionaries embarked on campaigns to end slavery by arguing that slaves demand mercy and compassion. In their mission to Ashanti, Sergeant Wolseley and his band of fighters projected the war in such grandiloquence so as to gain some sympathy and support from missionaries within the Gold Coast and also outside of the country. These were actually people that were already exposed to a number of abolitionist proposals. Rather than trade in human beings, humanity will profit more in trading in commodities, they added. For the missionaries giving support to the war, it was more or less an obligation for them to be able to pass on Christian faith to Asante. For the missionaries, the defeat of Asante was construed and seen as a kind of remedy for the slave trade and a civilizing mission. This mindset will be put into action immediately after the war, where Basel missionaries converted ex-slaves, some of whom volunteered to be agents of the propagation of the Christian message and values in the dominions of Asante. The interest of missionaries could further be viewed from the perspective of so-called religious and cultural hegemony. Missionaries had a belief that people of Asante and the Gokot deserved a different doctrinal heritage, especially when Asante religion and culture was seen as an exerting overarching influence and authority over the affairs of many of the missionary operations. Asante has several deities and have no problem with bringing in more. For example, Krachidente, Nana Bukum, and several others were part of Asante Kingdom. Beyond their own enduring internal conversions and difficulties, the fear and even dread of Asante religious and cultural practice, religious intolerance was, in this case, a very important factor in the interest of the missionaries as far as the Sagrenti War is concerned. The ritual practice and the modes of worship found in the traditional religions was also assumed to be one of the critical factors that made the missionaries to support the Sagrenti war. I'm told I'm ready. 1 minute. Oh, okay. Thank you. Now, if I have 1 minute, I better move maybe towards my conclusion. Now, in summary, several factors accounted for the missionary interest in the Sagrenti war, apart from the capture of Ramsey. The need for space to evangelize, the fear of conversion of Asante kings and other notables into Islam, and its attendant consequences on missionary work, the need to maintain some Christian and cultural hegemony in a kingdom that was highly revered and respected among others, made the Bashan missionaries to support British forces against Asante in the Sagrenti War. Thank you so much for your attention.
His Royal Highness Otumfuo Osei-Tutu II, Nananom, the Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, academics and staff of KNUST, MPs and Ministers of State, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
My dear Prof, we are an institution of learning, higher learning, and today gives us the opportunity to learn our culture at its best. Let's start it all over again with His Royal Majesty.
His Royal Majesty, Nana Otumfuo Osei-Tutu II, Nananom, the Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, academics and staff of KNUST, the MPs and Ministers of State, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's an honor to stand before you this morning to give my thoughts on war and diplomacy, especially perspective of women. There is an accounting lunch made threats to the Asantehene, Kofi Kakari and the chiefs during the discussion of the British takeover of all Dutch concessions, including the Elmina Castle. Obviously irritated by this, the Asantehima Efiakodi retorted, "I am only a woman, but I would fight the governor with my left hand." These two statements mentioned above provokes an inquiry into an understanding of the place of women in Asante state military structure. How do we reconcile the Asante proverb mentioned with the above statement made by Nana Efiakuri? What specific roles did women play in the Asante military setup? In which ways did religious and cultural beliefs hinder women from full participation in state war machinery? The 18th century were times of state union, expansion, consolidation for the Asante, and a constant feature which facilitated this process was war. Asante embarked on wars for political, economic, and ideological purposes. Analyzing the etymology of Asante, linguists equate the name Asante with war. Kwejo Osei, a known historian, gives two traditions to this effect. The first states that Asante emanates from the name Esan, which simply means war. So it is Asantefo is the corrupted form of Esa-Entifo. The second tradition also states that Asante was a vassal of Dentra, and Asante used to supply Dentra with red clay, which was known as Esan, used for building of houses. The people became known as Asantefo, which was corrupted to become Asantefo. It is essential to iterate here, especially joining into the conversation of Adi, who states that war essentially elevated men over women. After the Battle of Eyase, Nana Osei-Tutu I divided the states politically into different military duties, There was the Adontin, Chafo, Benkun, Nifa, Chidon, Jase, and the Ankobia. All these positions were occupied by men. Though theoretically, the Ohima, that is the co-ruler of the Ohene, could serve as the head of state in the absence of the king. I am then moving on to look at women in the founding of Asante. It is important to highlight the role played by the female ancestors in the founding of Asante. The Oyoku tradition indicates that Anchowenyame and her people descended from the sky near Esiapa in Achimebuapa. There is also another tradition which indicates that they descended near Asante Manso. Similar traditions are given by other matric lands, including Nyankupon Bueshia for the Bretu, Aso Bode for the Asuna, Amina Jata for the Asenie, and Sena Fontom for the Adriana. This explains the matrilineal system and why the genealogical descent is traced through the female line. At the core of the socio-political organization was the Abushia, headed by the Abushia Penny and the Oba Penny. The Ohene and Ohima at the highest level of state organization played complementary roles in leadership. The political status was conferred by the Ohima, who also served as the royal genealogist to determine the legitimacy of claims made to any vacant stool. And this accounts for the account proverb, Obana Owo Ohene. We are moving on then to look at women and war. Women played crucial roles in war politics in Asante. Nevertheless, their roles are largely ignored and underrated due to Asante's religio-cultural beliefs attached to war and gender. It is important to emphasize that childbearing women did not engage in frontline warfare, not because of their physical inadequacies, but because of the fear of menstrual contamination. Menstruation inhibited women's political progression because of the cultural beliefs attached to it. Though menstrual blood was considered a source of fertility, menstruating women were considered ceremonially unclean. They could not attend social activities in the community, participate in religious ceremonies, honoring their ancestors, visit the chief's court, or associate with any male government official. Menopausal women, however, were free from these menstrual taboos, enabling them to take part in ritual, social, and political activities. For an Asante menopausal woman, it was significant because it meant a shift from the normal life to become a respectable elder or bapeni. Old women acquired elderly privileges such as the right to cut their hair, the dancing crown, wear their cloth in the male fashion, drink liquor, pour libation, and engage in frontline war. Despite these limitations, women played crucial roles in war in Asante. One of the crucial roles seen is the ritual known as the Momume. This was a spiritual warfare in which premenopausal and menopausal women performed daily ritual chants, ritual dancing, mimes, and other spiritual performances to enhance the victory of the military in war until the troops returned. These women sometimes pounded empty mortars with pistols as a form of spiritual torture to Asante's enemies. Women also played female captains and the Asafotrema, who were a type of a rear guard. They provided military support services in times such as scouts, carriers, cooks, and provided war logistics. Women provided useful intelligence on strategies and troops of the enemy states. I go ahead to highlight the contribution of three Asantehima who played very key roles in the history of Asante. These are Efiakobi, Yecha, and then Yasantua. Efiakobi's skill in war and diplomacy is seen in her administrative tact, boldness in the era of crisis in Asante. She was also known as a pacifist and a great woman of a great shrewdness, who projected the unification of Asante above the love for war. On 20th November 1873, at the gathering of the Asanteman in Shiamu, she noted to have said, "From olden times, it has been seen that God fights for Asante if the war is a just one. This one is unjust. I am old now. I lived before Kwekubia, and I have now placed my son on the Asante throne. I do not wish for our ancestors to say my son was the cause of the disturbance of the 60 towns." The council of the military generals superseded hers, leading to the 1874 Sagrenti War with the British, in which Asante was defeated. Nana Kofi Kakari's lack of tact, acumen, and indecision eventually cost him the throne. When Efia Kobi found one of Kofi Kakari's wives wearing the gold ornament used to bury the deceased queen mother, she initiated his deposition, and in his place, Mensa Bonsu was appointed as the Asante. So this ties in with what Professor Makaski said earlier, that when he was enthroned, he misused state resources. In this instance, it can be said that she sought to project her self-interest above in the choice of rulers, because for the second time she put her own son on the throne. To secure the election of her younger son, Mensa Bonsu, as the next Asantehene, Nana Efia Kobi forged alliances with powerful chiefs, including Bantamahene Nana Ua II and Kokofuhene Nana Yaubek. Nevertheless, her own daughter, Yechan, overthrew and exiled her together with her son, Kakari, in 1884. Efia Kobi is remembered for her dedication to maintaining the ascension of her lineage in Asante. I move on then to look at Yechan. Yechan became the greatest rival of Efia Kobi as she ousted her own mother in 1884. She was known to be a ruthless ruler. She secured the arrest of Kakari in 1884 and ordered his execution. Over 200 Kakari's kindreds were also annihilated in the process, though eventually he was spared. Unfortunately, Kwekudria II reigned for only 44 days. After his death, Yechan fought for the stool for her son, Prempeh I. Supporters of her opponents, that is, Atrebuana, such as Butuakwa, Ochiame, Jobin, and Samahine Echampon Penyin, were all executed in the process. This led to a prolonged war of 4 years. Within the period, she assumed the role as a rival ruler of Asante and took possession of the golden stool so that no opponent could be enthroned. In Asante norms and value systems, the accumulation of wealth played a key role in power struggle. Yechan was a wealthy trader who used her money to finance the ambitions of her children. As a known wealthy woman, Yechan deployed her resources liberally. It was known that she bought loyalty using land. She also acquired a large supply of Sniper rifles and ammunition to aid her self-ambition. As a result, she was given the title Oba Berima. Yechan remained resolutely opposed to British diplomatic missions, including Griffin, Hobson, and Maxwell. This explains why she was targeted for exile together with Prempeh I and other prominent chiefs in 1896. She died in Seychelles on 2nd September 1917 at the age of 77. I move on to the last heroine in terms of Asante history, that is Yasantua. Yasantua was a formidable looking woman who had the slogan, "Men are not pillows for any woman to lean against." Yasantua played a pivotal role in galvanizing the Asante into action by challenging male impotency in a time of national crisis. Echampon and Obin emphasized that her devotion to the golden stool, determination and courage contributed to making the war against the British. When her grandson, Nana Kwesi Afrane, the Jesuhene, was exiled, together with Prempeh I by the British, she openly challenged the demands made by Sir Frederick Hodgson for the golden stool. Her devotion for the golden stool and determination contributed to the siege and guerrilla war from April to November 1900. This contributed to her famous statement, "How can a proud and brave people like the Asante sit back and look whilst the white men took away the king and the chiefs and humiliated them with a demand for the golden stool? The golden stool only means money to the white man. They have searched and dug everywhere for it. I shall not pay one prejan to the governor. If you, the chiefs of Asante, are going to behave like cowards and not fight, you should exchange your loincloth for my undergarments." For the sake of time, I'll move on to my conclusion. Within the broader framework of gender and power relations in Asante, women are highly recognized for their roles played in the continuity of their lineages. Because of the matrilineal structure of the Asante people, which centers on the idea that a woman passes her blood to her offspring, this bestows on women recognized political rights. Several queen mothers did not limit their responsibilities to women and domestic affairs, but played crucial roles to enhance national sovereignty. These queen mothers highlighted, defied gender stereotyping to shape Asante social and political institutions and prove the capability of women despite the religio-cultural ascribed biological limitations as compared to men. In conclusion, while women served limited roles in Asante Army due to customary disqualifications and the fear of menstrual taboos, upon reaching menopause, they assumed war politics together with men. As we celebrate the 150 years since the Sagrenti War occurred, it is important that we remember heroines of history, including Efia Kobi, Ya Echa, and Ya Asantua. I guess I will lastly play the devil's advocate here in probing the unsung stories of women. I wonder what the story would have been if these women had told their own stories. Had Ya Santua or Yecha been lettered or Western schooled, and had they similar avenues as Nana Ajimai Prempeh I while in exile, what stories would they have written about women and war? This leaves much to be desired. And I'll end by saying that as women, it bestows on us to go ahead and write our own history. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I've received royal instructions that we should end the panel discussion at 1 p.m. And that's why I was sending all these timekeeping instructions. So unfortunately, though I had promised Q&A, we will not be able to do Q&A. I beg for indulgence for just 2 or 3 minutes to offer some concluding remarks like academic protocol requires, and then we will thank our panelists and close our symposium. We've had a wonderful couple of hours, beginning with Tom McCaskey's keynotes. We've heard about the personal ambitions of individuals, someone like Garnet Wolseley, who was intent on leading the British Army, and the kinds of actions he would take because of his personal ambitions. We've heard of personal predilections, the two brothers, Kofi Kakari and Mensa Bonsu, and the consequences of some of these predilections. We've heard about the importance of timing. The 1870s, Sagrenti, and how the outcome was almost guaranteed because of British industrial and military superiority. In a sense, it was an unfair war. The timing of the 1880s, the scramble and the petition, will make the difference between 1874. Asante is defeated but not annexed, and the insistence in the 1890s that Asante should come under British suzerainty. So timing is important. War. We've talked about two wars, Sagrenti, Yas Antwerp, but with very different consequences. 1874, Asante is defeated but not annexed. 1900 enabled the British to treat Asante differently from even 1896. Now Asante was a territory of conquest. We cannot talk about Asante today without Christianity. Despite the rather ambivalent beginnings of Asante's relations with Christianity. I look at Kumasi today, and almost churches are part of the landscape. I think St. Cyprian's is the Anglican church, right? Which is also the Royal Church. Even Ramsia has a church named after him, which is the one in the room that my mother went to. There's Wellesley or the Methodist Church by the prisons. And you have to climb the hill to the Roman hill to the Roman church. And it is true that the Asante have today indigenized Christianity, as Archbishop Kwesi affirms. Women are half the population, and we cannot go anywhere without our women. And I've enjoyed listening to Eugenia's reflections on three important Queen Mothers, Efia Kobi, Yecha, and then Driso Imaya Santua. So this silver anniversary is a period of historical reflection and the capacity of history to rejuvenate Asante. Titika Asun, as Anadra Bigne reminded us, and the Asante love history. Please join me in thanking our four excellent panelists for their presentation. At this time, we'll take our seats so we can go back to our seats, and then Mr. Jerry behind me will take over again.
What shall we say to Prof. Tom Makeski, Professor Eugene Anderson, Professor Samuel Edudinfi, Professor Samuel Interwusu, and the masterful moderation from Professor Emmanuel Echampong. Please, a resounding round of applause. We want to thank you ever so much for lending us your mental agilities and fleshing out this book from various perspectives. Let's now go back to 1874, February. Like Dr. Baumia would say, you and I were not. But the gods, ancestors, and spirits live in all of us. And for the next few minutes, I want you to lend your very undivided attention to the Kumasi Cultural Center as they reenact February 1874. Yes.
Manano,
Mishia, 2-4, Santehini, or Tosuin, Yura. Nana, your mountain. And then, the activity said Sagrenti War, a culture center for, and never does that. So, actually, your choice, a fellow who are Emmanuel Chiwopera, Mesa. All the time, actually, I'm a person born
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kofi Obey. And he was the state manager for this production. And it is our hope that in the future, actually, this performance is 2 hours performance. But for this occasion, we have prepared this with 5 minutes. And this production is watched by Council Control Center, as he said, and made possible through the concerted efforts of some individuals, including the regional director of the Council Control Center, Mr. Kofi, and Professor Tanzania from the International Program Office. Because this production needed British stars, and not he was start from there. So thank you and enjoy the show.
Following the proactive war, 1826, also known as the Dodowa War or Akata also. The British and the Asante signed the Anglo-Asante Peace Treaty of 1831 at Cape Coast Castle. This treaty empowered the British to create the British protected territories on the lands across the river Trap. By 1872, the Danes and the Dutch had sold all their trading forts and castles to the British and left. These lands became protected from any Asante control or encroachment. The British protected territories of the southeast, including Asin, Wasa, Panche, Det, Akomu, Ga, Atangbe, and many others supported the British, serving as their informants. As so European on the coast, the British fomented the war against the Asantes. And this is how it all began. Yura, now say, yes, yeah, no, hey, Madame, so you do all of my you.
What are going to jam now? Maria, you know that Dane, you see, I don't know why it is.
Rainbow, Mama Johnson. I'm not the last one. I was in there. And I go on there. When you know, see Jara, when I say, no. Now, what can you do?
I don't know. I can't tell. Sabi, someone, and I'm moving here. Yet, I go to my travel, all the custom. I didn't tell myself, I tell you.
Ora, Poto, we need that. I can do it or one to one. What's that? I'm not going to go see. Do we know, man? And another. It means I can do any. I can probably be in it. I am made of it. I give you a little bit here. Let's see alone.
My lord, there are some chiefs here from the coastal areas, and they would like to see you.
What are they here for?
They have said they want to discuss official matters with you.
All right, let them come in. All right. All right, Mademoiselle. And I'm all right. I'm going for back. What's next? I want to home. What's the home? My lord, the king from the coast galleries. Welcome. And I don't, them round all the sea, all the, or more calm.
Yeah, right.
I'll tell you so. Also, become a panel.
I'm not a catchy. So, you're good on a bonnet. What? Me actually. Me, so I am Fantini. And also, the danger. What one egu, a canano ya to me, make I Yados. Yeah, some titty as I reckon. Yeah, I'm another. Yeah, who is so wide and pack at the Maya and another one. Never, young beer. One more as anti-memory train him to live. And one with me and Papa. I did not yet. I'm not woman. No, yes, sir. Say, I'm the way of my dear. Said yes, you have a talent. Not yes, I'm the funny beer. But I will be. Yeah, and I don't must make.
Another catch. You have to another as we said. I asked him to follow. Yeah, another the I had said. Almost my son, yeah, you better read the child. The other I didn't hear. So we're hoping. It was that and the phone that would be here. You don't get us as well. So I don't know who I am. And just say, oh, my body. Yes, my lord, what they are saying is simply that they want to be your informant. And also, they want to give you any secret, anything about their tactics. In return, they seek for your protection. Wonderful! And also in the name of For the information on the Ashanti on our Kakari. They can also know our grant and the protection measure for.
And I'm not awesome. On that master. That mama. Also, what?
Silver. Something for. You never check. Remember, when you were over, so I see a bossy dear, and when he say, will be entry for some papa, and your best circle. Madame,
yeah, so came for permission today.
Please, I thank them for coming and get them some refreshment.
Yes, my lord.
What's happening?
Also, what?
That's it. Whatever you know, by car.
Hey, madam. What?
Safa, Sadia, Najasi, or in a possible.
Charlie. Charlie.
Oh, oh.
Tiema anto mayamfo.
Zio.
Eni mma me se.
Zio.
Ene fra me fra wo mo.
Zio.
Eni ahobro so kura.
Zio.
Eye mo nyina woni sam se.
Zio.
Efiri bra, nuanu bi. Edom ko bo akasikoko no.
Zio.
Yenya ahwene kura enyi.
Zio.
Senti bitu abofo ma omko.
Zio.
Omko ya. Akanfu sampo kura ya mombi.
Zio. Kazache
ya momu si otupo kura anya.
Zio.
Enkotia, asade enkra emu odin. Zio mama bre me se. Bi mo ni bia. Sabi empanyin se akwa no ne takra ene kase.
Zio.
Enkwa ntimi enye na so.
Zio.
Tina mo do ko chere me se twene se mumra. Maka me ho. Ifise mpa no se aboa no opama nsa no ede wajia. Tina ma meto nsa frem.
Zio. Nananom. Oda ma mu tie me. Sabi yewura aka kadi wase no. Wase. Otu abofo. Amofo kwano. So ko sia na do ne tom. Abofo no bi wo no. Sabi ebu sabi enya. Akonyampo wantu bo na ka pesa kwa sinsa. Ekwa bi akira. Ana ado sa de nkra. Aba yewura abofo a wo so a mo okomfo no se. O ma kan tie yewura se. Yewura sa mo. You don't understand how me. You don't understand how me. Abuano, or the cat bear, and a red food. You know, Kofika can get away. Tanoma, on a super, that's a Kofia, to say more. Oh, now I tell someone, miss the other leader. I said, Mr. Panic on my eye. It doesn't even. You are saying, so fair one, never too many. He said, a boy, don't also before the night pompa, a boy, I say.
You're a chairman. Madam, that's Mama. I'm a Tossum Yensa. Mijina. Madam, a tea. Nancy, you're a Caribbean. Nanahima. Nana no kaya our hands so empty. Anano. Process and person who when you pay the bill mother. Now see you can't say you had say you count to me. Yes, I want that. Nanano. And children. Young now. And teachers like a man who now. As a cadet who now. And potentially. Man, so can Saga people Patama. I have not. Nanya Sagasi. Nanano, see a rabbit from coming water. You say, you can't watch out as you get that one.
You are getting tell me, who? You want here? Very much here. And Benny said, Sabuan when you know Kawa. 1 year is a child. I was already, why am I not telling him? Welcome. Yes, Nana was the gap. Of the one to my young lady, and yes, I survived. And then you have then Jimmy, young one.
You're a champion. Adama. I'm going to touch you. I'm not going to watch you. I'm not going to say. I'm going to go to the security. And young player. Oh, my young one. He wouldn't dear. Remember, I'm going to touch you. Oh, here, I'm a man. So I'm a choir. What's it going to be? 7 when you say, so bad you know, not to cheer. What's up? Metro, I'm not going to photo. I'm not going to go super. I'm not here with a potential. So I'm a choir. Metro was at the same. I said, so go. I'm almost there.
yɛyɛ asantefo.
Office here, Okwamia, Yafe. What's the message? Kakama can say, Mira, another woman. So I'm on the point. I can make. Let's say, Brody Coco, Tennessee, and a better.
Someone welcome.
You're a champ. Madam, she managed to hear and I must say, Madam, oh, so you can say, about it your way. In Abutagana, you won't show. Said it, just was a bit angry. Madam, I can't see about today. Okay. You said a problem. Yes, sir. Said the other day, said, Madam, let's jump it. Because if we're not going to say the room, Sabi, you want a several promises, Madam. Trust it. Somebody will get us. Good fool. Eracham. Adama. Afo. Berema for us. Madam, and to Mira, and to Nahima. Many of them were the Kakasai.